Welcome to Outside the Circle, guys. Today we'll be starting a new series that I am personally so excited about. Not only because it's a character study, which is really fun sometimes, especially when you get into the ins and outs of a character and understanding who they are, because sometimes you can kind of see where you might relate to them, and that can be both good and bad, because you can see where you relate where they excel, but you can also kind of see where you relate where they fail, and you can learn something from it. So a lot of cool things when you get into character studies, but I'm also really excited because it's actually going to be over one of my favorite people from the Bible. He was a simple shepherd boy who became a king, one of Jewish history's greatest heroes. That's right, I'm talking about King David. Now, I adore David for many reasons that sadly you're going to have to wait till like the final week as to not really spoil certain things in case you don't fully know those stories yet. But don't worry, in the final week, I will tell you some of the reasons of why I really love David. But you'll have to stick around for it, so gives you a reason to come back, I guess. But anyway, so we're primarily going to be in the book of Samuel, and over the next few weeks, we're just going to kind of look over the different high points and low points of David's life. A little bit sometimes feels more of the low points of his life, but definitely some high points as well. Today is definitely one of those high points. So let's just start out with some basic background information on David. So David was born around 1000 BC, a long time ago. Born in Bethlehem. For those who love reading the Christmas story, this makes total sense. This is where you get the name City of David that you kind of see in the book of Luke and things like that. He comes from a tribe of mostly shepherds, which he himself is a shepherd when we come up upon him. And he was born into the tribe of Judah. And that's going to be really important later. Like, much later. But we'll get there. He was born to Jesse, and he was the youngest of 8 boys. It's a lot of kids. So, well, really a lot of boys at that. And his name means beloved one, which I actually have just recently found out that that was a thing, and I think that's a really cool thing, especially as we go through this and learn about David. It's kind of really fun that that's his name. So, he comes from very humble beginnings, but he will eventually change the course of human history in a lot of different ways, not just him directly, but even through his descendants. But again, we'll get there because I'm getting very ahead of the story. So let's start at the beginning. But sadly, to really understand what we're walking into, we kind of have to do a history lesson here. And so, in fact, like, this will take us all the way back to the book of Exodus. That's how far back we're going. So don't worry, we're not going to go and read it all. I'm honestly just going to kind of do a high-speed recap to kind of get us up to where we need to be. So, back to Exodus. For those who know, this will be a great reminder. For those who don't, stick around and hopefully you learn something. So, book of Exodus. God leads his people out of slavery in Egypt through Moses, and then Moses leads them to the border of the Promised Land. Moses is not allowed to let them go into the Promised Land, so then after Moses dies, Joshua takes over, and then Joshua leads them into the Promised Land. And then a few years later, Joshua dies. I say a few. It was a good bit of years later. But still, after a while, Joshua dies, and so Israel is left leaderless. And this sends Israel into a constant circle that they persist for, honestly, a couple of generations. And basically, they're God's people. They fall away from God. They get into trouble. They cry out to God saying, "Hey, man, remember us? Can you help us?" And then God sends a judge to deliver them. And this went on for many cycles, from Gideon to Deborah to Samson, etc. There's a good bit of judges. And so this is just a complete circle that they keep doing constantly. Kind of seems to be Israel's MO throughout most of their history, is following God, figuring it out for themselves and being like, hey, I think we can do it without him. And then do what they want and then are punished because of it, and follow, like, people overtake them and things like that, and then they cry out to God, and God's like, well, those are my people, I'm gonna help my peoples out. And then he helps them out, and then they're like, hey, we're your people again, and then peace and prosperity reigns, and they fall off again. So kind of just their MO in general. Judges didn't really change that. But God would raise up these judges to kind of guide the people and deliver them from whatever they were facing at the time. And yet at the end of the judges, they still don't learn. In fact, the very last verse of Judges, like in the book of Judges, shows us that they didn't learn anything at all during these generations. In Judges 21:25, it says that in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. These people were lawless, you know? I mean, they did what was right in their own eyes, so truth is subjective, and therefore they can do what they want as long as they deem it right, you know? And so no matter how many times they were saved by God, they still rejected him as their one true king. In fact, coming close to our story, we will see in 1 Samuel that Israel demands a king for themselves. But before we get there, we do need to discuss one of the major characters from our story, Samuel. I mean, the book we're reading out of is literally named after him, so pretty important figure here. So Samuel, similar to David, comes from pretty humble beginnings. His mom was Hannah, and she was struggling for years to be able to conceive a child. And so this really ate at her very, very deeply. And so she cries out to God about it. And then she was able to conceive a son, who we now know as Samuel. And because of God blessing her with Samuel, Hannah dedicates him to God and says that, let this kid basically be for you, Lord. And God delivers on that, because God would end up placing a calling on Samuel's life. And as Samuel gets older, he heeds the call from God to be God's prophet to the nation of Israel. And so Samuel guided Israel well, but sadly, years later, when his sons kind of go to take over, they didn't really do that as well. In fact, in 1 Samuel 8, we find out that his sons turned toward dishonest prophets, took bribes, and perverted judgment, you know, and so vastly different people than Samuel. That's kind of where we pick up our story. So I know that was a lot to throw at you at one quick time. Hundreds of years of history in like 5 seconds. Hopefully we're all good. I hope we're good. If not, you can always just go back a little bit and re-listen if you need to catch up. But context is key. I don't want y'all missing anything, so there's your quick brief history going from Exodus to 1 Samuel. Sadly missed the book of Ruth, but great book if you go read it. Very small book. But anyways, so let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 8, starting in verse 4. It would help if I'm in the right book. I'm so sorry. You know, I'll know if somebody listened to this, because they'll know that I messed up here, and I was at 2 Samuel, not 1 Samuel, and that's why that verse looked weird. So anywho, 1 Samuel, chapter 8, verse 4. So this is right after it talks about Samuel and the fact that his sons were being dishonest and being lawless to an extent. So here we go. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and went to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Therefore appoint a king to judge us the same as the other nations. When they said, give us a king to judge us, Samuel considered their demand wrong. So he prayed to God. But God told him, listen to the people and everything they say to you. They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me as their king. They are doing the same thing to you that they have done to me since the day I brought them out of Egypt unto this day, abandoning me and worshiping other gods. Listen to them, but solemnly warn them, and tell them about the customary rights of the king who will reign over them. Those are some pretty tough verses. I mean, God didn't hold back from the people of Israel. He tells them flat out, you've rejected me and my authority, and now, I should be the king of Israel, because he is the God who established them. And therefore, the idea is look at me as king, and yet they didn't look at him as king, And that's brutal, And honestly, I wish we could really just sit and dissect that. But I also don't want this to go on for 5 hours. Because there's just so much good stuff to pick up from that. Maybe one day we'll do a lesson about it. Because, I mean, it's really good stuff to really sit and ponder on that. Recommend you do it in your free time. Love to hear what you guys have to think about that. But sadly, to kind of get to David, considering we're talking about young David, we kind of got to keep trucking on. So sadly, we're just going to have to move from that. But again, highly recommend it in your own time. But here's the interesting part here. God allows them to have a king, even though he's like, look, Samuel, they're doing to you what they've done to me. They rejected me as their king. You know what? But fine. They want a king. Give them a king, which is kind of fun. I mean, Israel basically pitched a fit, and God was like, fine, you want it. You can have it, which very interesting. That's a fun little rabbit hole to kind of go down. But anywho, so God sends Samuel to anoint the new king of Israel. Enter Saul. Not Paul Saul, but King Saul. Two different guys. Don't want y'all getting mixed up. So this is King Saul, not Paul Saul. So, fun fact. So, 1 Samuel 9:2 gives us our first look at Saul. It says, he, talking about Kish, who is a prominent man of the Benjamin tribe, he had a son named Saul, an impressive young man. There was no one more impressive among the Israelites than he. He stood a head taller than anyone else. So, pretty high praises for Saul right there, But Saul kind of started off pretty humble, I mean, he didn't even really want to be king when they first came to him, as far as when Samuel first came to him. But fate rarely calls upon us in a moment of our choosing. So Samuel anoints Saul as the next king, and for a while Saul was a great king. He united the tribes of Israel, as far as truly uniting them under his leadership, under one true leadership. And he was pretty successful in battle. Conquering left and right, following the Lord, being very victorious in all that he did. And so overall, he was a very prosperous and grand king. And that's kind of where the next part of our story picks up. So go with me to 1 Samuel chapter 15. Gotta flip over a few pages. Still in 14. 15, starting in verse 1. Samuel told Saul, "The Lord sent me to anoint you as a king over his people Israel. Now listen to the words of the Lord. This is what the Lord of armies says. I witnessed what the Amalekites did to the Israelites when they opposed them along the way as they were coming out of Egypt. Now go and attack the Amalekites. Amalekites. Why am I saying it like that? Amalekites. You know what? Whoever listens to this is probably going to rip into me for some of my mistakes today. We'll see who actually pays attention, I guess, while listening. So, verse 3. Now go and attack the Amalekites and completely destroy everything they have. Do not spare them. Kill men and women, infants and nursing babies, oxen and sheep, camels and donkeys." Then Saul summoned the troops and counted them. Oh wait, I'm going too far. Sorry. I was only supposed to go to 3. It is one of those days, and you figure I would just re-record, but you know, I like to be raw and honest with people, and this is me sometimes, not always getting it right. So anywho, God gives him a pretty basic command here. In fact, it's kind of a command that usually is given to him over the course of time. And that's what led to Saul being such a great king, is the fact that God would say, hey, go here and do this, and he would go there and do that. And, it worked well for so long. But sadly, this time, Saul didn't exactly listen properly. So let's skip down to verse 9. Saul and his troops spared Agag and the best of the sheep, goats, cattle, and choice animals, as well as the young rams and the best of everything else. They were not willing to destroy them, but they did destroy all the worthless and unwanted things. See, God gave Saul a simple command that had led to his success in the past. But this time Saul didn't really care to listen. In fact, he went into business for himself, and this angered God. So much so that God decided to kind of take care of Saul, which is where we pick up in verse 10. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned away from following me, and he has not carried out my instructions. So Samuel became angry and cried out to the Lord at night, or all night. I just have to ask the question there of how bad would it be to know that God regretted giving you a position? Obviously as someone who's just been kind of given the platform of young adults, I don't know, that one kind of hits deep because here I am, I don't want to disappoint him, and clearly you got someone like Saul where it's I regret doing that, and it's I know for sure I would hate to feel like God ever said that, I regret letting you lead young adults, oh gosh, that would crush me. But that's exactly where Saul's at here. Saul disobeyed a direct command from God and chose to do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. And again, go into business for himself. And so God regretted giving him the position of being king. In fact, it's the verb there for regretting is actually the same one that's used in Genesis when God expresses regret over making mankind during the days of Noah, which is pretty bad that they're on the same level. Obviously, this idea of God regretting makes it sound like he changed, but that's not actually what took place. God knows what's going to take place. And so it almost, I don't want to say it like this, but it almost comes off of an I told you so. Because it's God's oh, hey, I'm supposed to be your king. And they're well, we don't want you. We want a real king. God's fine, you can have a king. He's probably going to be bad. Because, obviously God knew what Saul was going to do. So it's fine, you can have a king. He's going to fail you, but you can have a king. And so they gave him, God let him have a king. And here we go, the king failed them. And it's just it almost feels like God's I told you he'd fail you. I know this guy. I know who Saul is. I knew he was going to do this. But of course, God doesn't act that way. He's a gracious and loving God, so he's not an I told you so kind of God. But that's almost what it comes across if we're being honest. But again, God doesn't regret in the sense of, oh, hey, he put him there not knowing that Saul would act this way. It's just because he foreknew it, once it comes to pass, it's still yep, here we are, It's a weird brain thing to try to think on, but still, that's what we see happening here is that God's I regret making you king at all, which is just horrible. And honestly, this is another great section that would be so rich to truly just invest in. But sadly, that's not really the point of today. So once again, please do it in your own free time. But sadly, we have to keep going forward. I say sadly, I'm excited to keep going forward, but I do hate that we can't really pit stop there and really hone in on some of that. So let's go on down to verse 19. This is Samuel talking. So why didn't you obey the Lord? Why did you rush on the plunder and do what was evil in the sight of the Lord? But I did obey the Lord, Saul answered. I went on a mission the Lord gave me. I brought back King Agag, and I completely destroyed the Amalekites. The troops took the sheep, goats, and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was set apart for destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God. Then Saul said, Does the Lord take pleasure in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? Look, to obey is better than sacrifice. I really want y'all to hone in on this, so I'm going to read 22 again because I really need y'all to hold on to this verse, okay? Then Samuel said, Does the Lord take pleasure in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? Look, to obey is better than sacrifice. To pay attention is better than the fat of rams. Verse 23. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and defiance is like wickedness and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Saul answered Samuel, I have sinned. I have transgressed the Lord's command and your words. Because I was afraid of the people, I obeyed them. Now therefore, please forgive my sin and return with me so I can worship the Lord. Samuel replied to Saul, I will not return with you, because you rejected the word of the Lord. The Lord has rejected you from being king of Israel. So again, I really want y'all to kind of bookmark verse 22 there for a later date. Sadly, that's not a part of today. We're going to get into it in a few weeks. But I do really want y'all to hold on to that because it is going to be important for something we discuss later as kind of a teaser for something ahead. So for those paying attention, there you go. So, but for today, so Samuel flat out tells Saul, like, God's rejected you as king. And of course, Saul tries to come up with excuses like, oh no, don't reject me. Like, I love the Lord. I'm sorry. I messed up because I was terrified of people. Please accept my apology. And Samuel's just like, nah. God said it. It's done. We're moving on. And this sends Samuel on a journey to find God's new anointed king. And so God directs Samuel to the little town of Bethlehem and to the house of Jesse. And in chapter 16, verse 7, God actually gives Samuel the criteria to look for. But the Lord said to Samuel, Do not look at the appearance or his stature, because I have rejected him. Humans do not see what the Lord sees, for humans see what is visible, but the Lord sees the heart. This actually kind of echoes a spot in Job where talks similar of the Lord seeing the heart of man. And that's kind of really the big point that we're going to hone in on today. Because this is what God gives Samuel, saying, look, don't look at how he looks. Don't look at his stature. Don't look at his size. Don't look at, his muscle build, so to say. Look at his heart. That's what I'm looking for, is a heart. And sadly, Jesse, which, God tells Samuel this, but Jesse did the exact opposite here. See, Jesse sent all of his boys in here, minus his youngest. And so he calls all of them up for Samuel to see them, but Samuel looks at all of them and one by one rejects every single one of them and says, this is not God's chosen. And so this is kind of where we pick up in verse 11. Samuel asked him, Jesse, are these all the sons you have? There is still the youngest, he answered, but right now he's tending the sheep. Samuel told Jesse, "Send for him. We won't sit down to eat until he gets here." So Jesse sent for him. He had beautiful eyes and a healthy, handsome appearance. Then the Lord said, "Anoint him, for he is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on David from that day forward. Here we go, guys. We finally made it to David. I told you we'd get there. I know, this was titled Young David, and I feel like we've spent more time off of David. But, again, context is key, and I really just need y'all to understand the stage and where we're at to understand where we're going forward. So, here we are with David in a very Cinderella-type story, except for this time he wasn't locked outside, but he was definitely kept away because, like, oh, it's just David. He's the baby. Obviously, it's not going to be him. It's one of my older, stronger, buffy, whatever you want to call them. Because some of them, as we will find out later, spoiler, not fully spoiler, we'll find out later, some of them are actually at war with the king for the king's army. So, these are probably well strong men and things like that. And so, Jesse sends them all out and is like, oh, I got another one out in the field. He's just a lowly shepherd. He's not going to be a king, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And, sadly, even Jesse, David's own father, didn't even think he was worth it. Like, it's like he wasn't even worth showing up to be a part of the festivities of, like, hey, send me your sons. And it's like, okay, I'll send them to you. And at the end of the day, it's like, Samuel's like, is this all of them? Like, God told me you're, the anointed one's in here, and yet I rejected all of these based on what God's given me. And so, that's kind of where we're at. Because Jesse didn't even think he was worthy of it. It's like, that's just the lowly shepherd. He's the youngest. What does he have to offer, basically? And yet, we have to go back to look at what was God's criteria with all of this, and that's the heart at the end of the day. He told Samuel, don't look at this, look at the heart, God told Samuel out of the gate that it was not about what they look like on the outside, but at the heart. And this is going to be really big for future weeks. I'm giving y'all a lot of stuff of hinting at what's coming forward. But that's the fun of a character study, is there's a lot of imprints you can see throughout early life that will come into handy later. But God was looking at a heart. And boy, did David have a heart. Over the next few weeks, we're actually going to look and see that David's heart was fierce. He had a heart of a lion. A forgiving heart, a repentful heart. But most importantly, he had a heart for God, at the end of the day. In fact, we'll touch on a lot of them, but the book of Psalm, there's over 70 of them that are attributed to David writing, and they're basically like songs. Is basically what a psalm is. And you got some that are about wonder or heartache and grief and joy and victory and just, across the spectrum, we have a lot of different ones. But ultimately, with almost all of them, the central focus is just being in awe of God and who He is and how He interacts with us, really. And so through these Psalms, we actually get to see a great picture of this heart of God that David has, this is why he becomes known as a man after God's own heart. That's the high praise that is given to David. It's to be known as a man after God's own heart. And not getting too much into it today, but the beauty of this is we will find out that David does make some mistakes. David does fall short. David does do some really just boneheaded things from time to time. And yet, at the end of the day, he was still known as a man after God's own heart. And that just speaks a lot to who David was. And over the next few weeks, again, we're going to find out why, even after everything, that at the end of the day, he was always called that. Because trust me, there's going to be a lot that we're going to sit here and say, how is that man a man after God's own heart? But, you know, it'll be answered. I will tell you that it will be answered. In fact, it'll be answered on one of my favorite weeks. And one of the reasons I really love David, but again, not getting into that today because you'll have to come back for that one. I know today a lot was thrown at you guys, a lot of history stuff and a lot of context to set up stuff. Didn't really get too much into young David, but again, a lot of what we have to see from young David as of now is that he was just a shepherd boy who even his own dad didn't think he was worthy enough to even stand before Samuel, to even be acknowledged as a potential candidate for king. And yet he was the one that God told Samuel to anoint as king. And we're not done with young David yet. Young David still has a grand part next week. For those of you who know the story of David, you'll probably know exactly where we're heading next week. But the big key for this week is understanding that God chose David from a young age because he saw the heart that was within David, which is completely contrasted to the heart in Saul, which is why God rejected Saul. But getting ahead of myself with that one, we'll get into that one week. But again, the big key here is that David is a man after God's own heart, and God saw into that heart because he sees into everybody's heart. And that's what he wants. It's not about outside. It's not what it looks like. I mean, in fact, we really just got done talking about this not too long ago with the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is like, stop doing this, stop doing that. Don't do things for people to see. Don't act this way so people can see stuff. But it was all about a heart change then, and it's always been that way from day one. From God, it's always been that he wants our heart. So in closing today, I just kind of want to read a psalm that was written by David that is about the greatness of God and how we as man should really humble ourselves before God. So I kind of want to end most weeks with a psalm if I can. If I can find a psalm that kind of fits with what we're talking about, I really want to kind of end with it because it's the best way to know David's thoughts and, again, know his heart because it's what he wrote down. So Psalm 8, my title actually says God's Glory, Human Dignity, but it's a Psalm of David. Lord our Lord, how magnificent is your name throughout the earth. You have covered the heavens with your majesty from the mouths of the infants and nursing babies. But you have established a stronghold on account of your adversaries in order to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I observe your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you set in place, what is a human being that you remembered him? A son of man that you look after him. You made him little less than God and crowned him with glory and honor. You made him ruler over the works of your hands. You put everything under his feet, all the sheep and oxen, as well as the animals in the wild, the birds of the sky, and the fish of the sea, that pass through the currents of the seas. Lord our Lord, how magnificent is your name throughout the earth. See you guys next time.